Welcome everyone, Costin here with my Legendary Lord rankings for Total War Warhammer 3 for the Vampire Counts. The Vampire Counts are certainly a very powerful race right now in Warhammer 3. They have a good economy, they have the ability to get a lot of units very quickly. They can overwhelm their enemies with numbers or even with high quality units, dependent on what they can raise the dead. You fight a battle against a powerful enemy army and you can rebuild any losses you have or even strengthen your army with higher tier units. That is something available to all of the Vampire Counts Legendary Lords. So they're all strong, don't get me wrong in that, but some are stronger than others. And in this list I'm going to go from the worst to the best. And well, the worst is going to be Manfred von Carstein. Now, any particular bias that the player base has against Manfred for pretty obvious lore related reasons doesn't factor into this. His starting position and his faction benefits, as well as his own personal benefits, do, however. He does get a 20% research rate, he does start with a blood kiss, he does have a unique structure in Castle Drakenhof. Okay, so you have to go from here all the way to here. Yeah, that's a long journey. That's a very long journey. And while he does have access to the Books of Nagash, they also are all over the map. There's one close enough. There's another one in Lamia if you want it. But the other ones, yeah, they're kind of far away, to be quite honest with you. At least these three in particular. So really, you're going to spend a vast portion of your campaign chasing down books. I imagine you could rush for them, ignore enemy armies, and just rush for them with a powerful Doomstack, and you certainly have the capability of doing so. But it is going to be a harsh road. And by the time you complete it, most likely you've already won the campaign, really, when it comes down to it. That's the first thing. When it comes to his personal skill tree, he does get an upkeep benefit for Graveguard and Master of the Black Arts ability, as well as wins a magic power capacity, so he's a good caster. Though when it comes to these kind of lords, you generally want to focus on their melee tree first and then worry about their casting tree, or doing a combination doesn't necessarily work very well. He doesn't have a special skill tree though. He does get some special abilities, sure, especially Lore Master, Lore of Death, and Lore of Vampires. But you're probably going to specialize in either Lore of Death or Lore of Vampires. Probably Vampires, if I'm being honest. Winds of Death is pretty damn strong. Besides, you get magical reserves and arcane conduit through the Lore of Vampires. So it's probably the one that's recommended. The problem with Manfred, and this is the thing that drags him down the most, is his starting position. Not the fact he doesn't have a special skill tree, not the fact that he has to go around the world to chase down the books, but he starts surrounded by enemies around here. He's got Cetra to the north, he doesn't like him. He's got Volkmar to the west. He's got Lizardmen, Krokar, and Tic-Tac-Toe to the south. And then even further south, he has Kairos, Teclis, plenty of enemies. And then, of course, there's Forik. Let's not ignore the Angry Dwarf. I mean, he's in an especially vulnerable position for any kind of endgame crisis. He does start with a pretty decent settlement over here in Casabar, since Casabar can give you quite a good amount of income. Sure, there are certainly benefits with Manfred's starting position, but at the same time, he does have a fairly rough start. Anyone that starts in this kind of area, be it Volkmar, etc., Manfred, even Forik, they all have hard starts. Though, to be honest, Forik is kind of shielded from it, though. Don't be surprised when you start seeing the armies of either Volkmar or Manfred descending on your capital as Forik, which is a distraction you really don't want to deal with. Every lord here has a very vulnerable territory that they need to defend, and plenty of enemies, powerful enemies, that can take advantage of that. I mean, it's not like the lords here are weak. No, they're incredibly powerful, each of them in their own right. Like Cetra is probably one of the most powerful legendary lord of the Tomb Kings, at least in his own combat ability. Volkmar, yeah, he's a maniac. Tic-Tac-Toe's army is devastating, especially to you, because guess what? You have no fucking range units. You're gonna get screwed over by Tic-Tac-Toe and his flying range units. And then the last defender is Krokar. yeah, they're gonna tear you to shreds as well if you encounter them. You can win for run numbers and the more powerful economy and being able to get units faster, but it is certainly the roughest start of the vampire counts, and that's why Manfred gets the number 5 position on this list. Now, number 4, we have Vlad von Carstein, who's an incredibly popular character among the fanbase. Sadly enough, he does have certain issues. He does get 10% campaign movement range, a unique building in Castle Drakenhof, and starts with Isabella von Carstein as a legendary hero, as well as 1 Blood Kiss. On a personal level, he gets an increase to the battle healing cap when in an army with Isabella, and all units in his army get Vanguard deployment, which is pretty nuts when you see it. He's one of the selfish legendary lords in that his skill tree, by and large, is designed to buff his own army, though he does get some faction benefits like diplomatic relations with the Empire or unit experience per turn for all armies. But by and large, many of the things that Vlad does have are designed, including his items, are designed to help out his own army. It is a terrifying force on the battlefield, though I also think Vlad does kind of suffer significantly because, well, he has no mount, sadly enough. He's a wrecking ball when you send him into battle, but actually getting into the battle itself can be a bit of an issue. Now, why is he only at number 4 when really he should deserve to be higher? He does get a unique building in the Mausoleum of the Mad Count, so he gets more vampire capacity, hero recruit rank, hero recruit cost for vampires, which is pretty nice. He does have a gold mine. But here's the issue for Vlad, and also the same issue for Isabella. He starts surrounded by the Empire, which hates him, the Dwarves, which hate him, and even the Greenskins, which don't like him either. Azak specifically over here. And while you can certainly make deals with Kislev, funnily enough, make a military alliance with Kislev, help Kislev fight their foes, is going to be a rough situation. Especially because, well, guess what? You can't really colonize the mountains. You won't have issues when it comes to public order or control, rather. But yeah, keeping the mountains is not going to be worth it because the construction cost and income from buildings is going to be, well, the construction cost is going to be vastly increased. The income is going to be vastly decreased. So colonizing the mountains is not really worth it. And yet you are incredibly vulnerable from the mountains in all areas. In fact, a lot of this territory I've burnt to the ground specifically just so no one would recolonize it, and I didn't want to spend the money trying to hold it in my own right. One benefit that Vlad does have, of course, is that caravans, a lot of them will pass by Castle Drakenhof, so you can just, if you see a caravan, recruit a lord, take it out, gain a significant amount of money. But being exposed like this does create a lot of issues in your campaign, because you're going to have to run around putting down fires as more and more factions do declare war on you. And given the aversion a lot of factions have towards you and the aversion the AI has against the player, I do expect a lot of issues to come out of that. And so, while you're powerful, without a doubt, while you certainly are powerful, you're also going to be running around like a maniac trying to keep your empire together. Now, in number 3, we have Isabella von Carstein. She has the same starting position as Vlad, she has the same unique units as Vlad in Drakenhof, but her faction benefits are going to be different. She has the same thing with Blood Kiss, but she gets an extra hero capacity of +3 to vampires, and you do get the structure that you can build on turn 1 in Drakenhof that will allow you to recruit vampires. So you can get quite a few vampires, +4 when you're counting the one that you can recruit from the structure. You can get 4 vampires in your starting army, giving you an enormous amount of early game power for your faction. Then, of course, she starts with Vlad, so she also gets Vanguard deployment for her army if she has Vlad embedded. And, of course, if you're playing as Vlad, he also gets the melee attack and melee defense that Isabella provides to embedded heroes. Significant amount of combat power here. Now, here's the thing why I think Isabella is better. She does have flying mount. which is actually quite nice to be able to get around and destroy enemies in your path. Then she gets her special skill tree, though she'll get this regardless of whether or not you're playing Vlad or Isabella. But she does get a benefit to Direwolves, Felbats, Vargeists, and Terrorgeists. Armor piercing, more hero capacity. Again, you can take advantage of this as Vlad all the same. You can get a ridiculous amount of vampires, however. Vigor loss reduction, an ability, an active battle ability, a vortex ability, as well as finally speed benefit for Direwolves. Like, she's really buffing those monstrous units in a significant way. Though they're not my favorite units, to be quite honest. But the real benefit that Isabella brings you, that you get only when you're playing her, is 25% weapon strength for embedded vampire heroes, including Vlad. Including Vlad when he is embedded in Isabella's army. Also, fun fact, as opposed to having to unlock his items, Vlad will start with them when you're playing as Isabella. I mean, Isabella will start with her item when you're playing as Vlad, but it's not necessarily that useful. Whereas Vlad's items, oh yes, that 20% ward save, casualty replenishment, getting that from the start and not having to worry about the quest battles gives you a significant amount of early game power. Like, this is what Isabella has. She can get more vampires, she can get better items from the very start, get a powerful doom stack rolling, and crush everything in your path. Given your starting position, that is a significant power that she does have in her hands. So yeah, she is better than Vlad, though Vlad is going to show up on the diplomacy screen, because technically you're playing Vlad, but you're not playing Vlad. Isabella was crazy in Warhammer too. Now, with the changes they've made to the legendary heroes, specifically Vlad being a legendary hero, all that, she isn't quite as strong comparatively to how Vlad was, but she's still pretty damn powerful when it comes to a fight, and there's very little that can stand in her way. Like, you can make a hero doomstack with Isabella, and it will tear to shreds everything in your path, and you have much easier access to getting those heroes. You get free from your faction benefit 1 vampire. Truthfully, it's going to be 2, isn't it? Because you will always have 1 by default. So it's going to be like 5, really, total vampires. So you start with 1, 5, and then you, with the skill tree, 7 vampires. 7 freaking vampires that you can get very, very early on. Your economy might not actually be able to support that, surprisingly. But yeah, you can get a good amount of heroes going early on, start leveling them up, getting items for them, getting their skill tree. And by the time you're out of the early game, you have an unstoppable doomstack of heroes. And Isabella greatly buffs their combat potential. Losing the campaign movement range is well worth the benefits that Isabella brings compared to Vlad. She does have the same issue in terms of starting positions surrounded by enemies, but I think she's going to have a better time dealing with all of those early game issues as opposed to Vlad. Now in number 2, we have Heinrich Kemmler, the Necromancer. He doesn't have the same kind of combat power as either Vlad, Isabella, or even Manfred, but what he doesn't have in combat power, he certainly more than makes up for it in terms of what he brings on the campaign map, which is more important from my perspective than actual combat ability. Though he certainly does have some combat ability with the ability of summoning Krell in combat. Krell is quite strong, though he's certainly not as strong as proper Lord with items and a skill tree, though he will be able to hold his own quite very well. Of course, that's just the start with Heinrich Kemmler. He also has a significant benefit to raising the dead through his special skill tree. Actually, like when it comes to his skill tree, he gives horrible regeneration to Karen Wraiths and Hex Wraiths. He can recruit White Kings from all provinces and gets a hero capacity to them. He gets post-battle chance of stealing a magic item, so you can get items much easier. Campaign movement range as well to go along with it. More benefits to Wraiths as well. But then the real power comes into play for him. He gets a minus 35% reduction cost to raising the dead. But this goes even further, because his final skill also buffs that again by 15%. So you're looking at here a 50% cost reduction for raising the dead, which is honestly one of the main ways you recruit out of the vampire counts. Not regular recruitment, raising the dead, fighting a battle and raising the dead. He does get replenishment in foreign territory, wins a magic cost for Lord of Vampires, which he has, as well as Lord of Undeath. But then there's his quest items, and not the individual items themselves, but the set bonus. This will further reduce the cost of raising the dead by 15%, getting to such a ridiculous level, because you get 50%, then 15% on top of that, so 65% cost reduction for raising the dead. And you can raise the dead for, well, free, really, at a certain point, because, well, there's research that can help you with that. Like, for instance, minus 35% raise dead cost for skeletal warriors and skeletal spearmen, as an example. And reducing the upkeep cost. So he can raise a very powerful army very quickly, far more quickly than any other legendary in the vampire counts, getting high tier units very quickly. On top of that, his faction benefit is to get diplomatic relations with Chaos, Demons of Chaos, and Beastmen and Norska, though in this case Nakari has declared war on me. But that means your northern flank, as you start in Bretonnia, your northern flank is going to be secure, it's not going to be raided. Chances of you actually ending up in a war are lower than it is for other factions and facing northern invasions. Though you can also invade Norska yourself, because you get immunity to cast Undivided Corruption and cast Wastes Attrition. And you get minus 10% raid dead cost faction wide. So you're looking, with all his items, 75% raised dead cost for Kemmler and 10% faction wide. But there's more. He starts here in the Blackstone Post. Now, Kemmler generally doesn't do a lot if you're not playing him, but when you play him, you really realize the power this guy has. He can settle the mountains, so he doesn't have the same issues that Vlad and Isabella do have when it comes to expanding across the mountains that do surround them. So you do have some mountains surrounding you. Your initial province is split between these three settlements, so it can be a bit annoying, but you can settle the mountains so you can expand in different ways. You also start surrounded by minor factions. Your only real threats are going to be Bretonnia and the Empire, and you're stronger than either of them. Yes, Leon Leocoeur is a beast in battle, but defeat him on raw numbers. Like, this is turn 21, and I've got almost a full stack here. Gonna get it to a full stack. Have a full stack here of pretty decent units. Have another full stack under Kemmler over here. And I'm still gaining a significant amount of income over here. The Empire has been reduced to Midland, and if they hadn't confederated, or actually they seized those territories, I'm guessing Kazrak came over there and took those territories, or a civil war sparked. I'm not quite certain, I haven't looked. No, it wasn't a civil war. It was merely a case of Karl Franz taking that territory, then declaring war on me, trying to stop me, and failing to do so. And you have a vast amount of territory here in a relatively safe pocket. You also have the Red Duke, who you can make alliances with, have a defensive alliance with him, so you can protect your frontier against the elves, who are quite likely going to declare war against you. Or Nakari, in this particular case. And Nakari is going to land on her own and start doing some damage there, though I should be able to stop them by sending an army over there. But it's overall a fairly safe campaign position with quite a few options of expansion. You may end up in a war with the Empire, but the Empire is really good territory for you to seize, and the only real issue might end up being the Wood Elves over here in Alpha Lorem. Outside of that, none of the factions that border you are much of a threat to your armies. And even if you lose a lot of troops, you can recruit them back again very, very cheaply. So Kemmler really makes use of many of the strengths that the vampire counts do have in terms of having cheap recruitment, global recruitment, very powerful recruitment, and he makes it that significantly easier. And that's why he's number 2 on this list. Not the most powerful in terms of combat ability, but in terms of campaign position, faction benefits, and just overall campaign, he is significantly better than either Manfred or even Vlad and Isabella, because he's not quite as exposed as Vlad and Isabella are, but he does get many of the same benefits that they do, because yeah, their empire is ripe for the taking, but he's not as vulnerable as they are when it comes to that. Also, I feel that Vlad and Isabella are just more useful on the campaign map when you're not playing them, as opposed to Kemmler. That's also something to factor in. Kemmler is kind of useless when you're not playing him, whereas Vlad and Isabella aren't useless. They will expand, they will prove their worth, and they will do things on the campaign map. Though in this case, they don't particularly like me, given the treaties I've made with Musulan, but I'm sure I can make that work. Or I'll just conquer Sylvania for my own purposes. We'll see how that plays out. And finally, and number 1, though he certainly isn't my favorite, and I actually don't really like his campaign, but it is Helman Ghorst. Anyone who doesn't put Helman Ghorst as the number 1 legendary lord for the vampire counts at the moment is just ignoring how powerful this bastard is. Not the most fun gameplay style, I admit. Certainly not something I would enjoy, and his personal combat ability is something that's pretty pathetic. But Ghorst, although he was a joke as a legendary lord in both Warhammer 1 and 2, has become one of the most powerful legendary lords in the entire game, because he buffs zombies. He gets a raised death pool capacity for zombies, own provinces, casualty replenishment 10%, poison attack, so the zombies, skeletal units can reduce the combat ability of units they're fighting, and he also has lesser raised dead for corpse carts and mortis engine, so they can summon more zombies in battle. He also starts in a relatively safe position here in the Hunted Forest, with the only enemy he really has is Kugaf over here, and maybe Greases to the north. Though Greases is going to end up being destroyed quite quickly by Ghorst's never-ending tide of zombies. Now, army-wise, personal benefit-wise, he gets immunity to plague, immunity to contact effect, so no poison or anything like that in battle, 30 armor for zombies, and crypt gold. So he makes zombies incredibly durable units. To give you an idea, they have pretty much no armor by default, and yet he makes them have more armor than skeletal warriors. And he also buffs crypt goals to a fairly substantial point. So that armor actually is quite useful. Armor counts quite a bit in auto-resolve, so he's gonna get a benefit to auto-resolve because of that. But there's more. When it comes to his special skill tree, he's very much the kind of guy who buffs his entire faction overall. He gets melee attack 12 for zombie units faction-wide, ward save faction-wide for zombies, battle healing cap 500% for zombie units faction-wide. Ravenous Dead, so they replenish hit points while hit points in combat, more or less. Faction-wide. Weapon strength 50%. Faction-wide. And then he gets the same kind of skill trees that Kemmler gets, so he can reduce the cost of raising dead by quite a substantial amount. Though nowhere near as powerful as Kemmler. Let's be very clear on this. Nowhere near as powerful as Kemmler. But here's the thing. He makes zombies incredibly powerful units. Even by default, that 30 armor is going to count quite a lot. Like, let's just take his army over here. This is his starting army, by the way. Yeah, it's that bonkers. You take this army, and you get the decisive auto-resolve, right? And now you have a full stack, by the way, because you can raise the dead in different provinces. Okay, and that's just the start, right? Any guy who can go toe-to-toe against the Skaven from turn 1 in terms of raw numbers is a guy that's incredibly powerful. As I said, safe start position, incredible combat ability, and the ability, really crucially, of recruiting a lot of units very quickly and very, very cheaply. So if I get the Lord here, I can't raise the dead, but each zombie is only 26 upkeep. And they all get those benefits faction-wide that he has. All those benefits, the ward save, the melee attack, the weapon strength, the ravenous attacks, being able to regenerate HP, and also the corpse cards. But you do the math, 26 or 20, how much is that, right? You can maintain an army for each individual army of zombies can be less than 1,000 upkeep, which means that you can maintain more armies than pretty much any other faction in the entire game. And while zombies would generally be pathetic units that don't really have a great deal of combat power, Ghorst gives them that combat power through his faction-wide buffs. Quest-wise, yeah, it's nothing too special, though recruit rank for Necromancers faction-wide is pretty nice. Research benefit, reducing the raise dead cost even further. It's not going to be the same as Kemmler, but it's pretty close, I admit. It does get pretty close to Kemmler. It does feel like it gets within striking distance of Kemmler, though Kemmler is pretty bananas when you think of that 75% reduction in raise dead. You're not going to get, you're going to get like close to half of that, which is still very substantial, especially considering that he's just gonna want to use zombies, the never-ending tide of zombies that just cannot be stopped because they're very cheap units, very cost-effective units, and very powerful in the hands of Helman Ghorst. It's not a great campaign style. It's not the best battles you're gonna fight, not the most interesting battles you're gonna fight on the campaign map, but the power cannot be denied. Yeah. Ghorst's playstyle is kind of bullshit, but it works. It works incredibly well. I mean, again, this is turn 1, and I have 20 fucking units for just 2k upkeep, and I can defeat any other army that I would meet here in the early game. Warriors of Chaos, Greenskins, it doesn't matter. I would both outnumber them and overpower them. I have both quantity and quality, and this is turn 1. Once this guy gets going, once he gets his economy in order, once he starts conquering territory, he becomes even crazier. So Helman Ghorst, number 1 for bloody good reason. Costin here signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, enable notifications, and I'll see you next time.